Space is trying to kill you in about 15 different ways simultaneously. There is no air, the temperature swings between positive 120 and negative 270 degrees Celsius, depending on which direction you're facing. The radiation alone would cook your DNA before you had time to appreciate the view, and the vacuum pressure would cause your bodily fluids to boil. No living thing should be able to survive direct exposure to outer space. That is not an opinion, that is just physics, except there is one animal that can. It has been tested multiple times by actual scientists in actual space, and it just came back completely fine. Stay with me until the end, because this animal doesn't just survive space, it survives basically everything, and the implications of that are genuinely going to mess with your head. Meet the tardigrade, the toughest animal on Earth, and apparently off it. The tardigrade, also called a water bear or moss piglet, because scientists occasionally have a sense of humor, is a microscopic animal, roughly half a millimeter long, that lives in moss, soil, leaf litter, and just about anywhere else that gets damp. They have 8 stubby legs, a tiny barrel-shaped body, and a face that looks like someone tried to draw a vacuum cleaner from memory. They are, by every visible measure, completely unremarkable. But what they can do to stay alive is one of the most extraordinary things in all of biology. When conditions get bad, and bad for a tardigrade means anything from extreme heat to extreme cold to radiation to complete dehydration, they do something called cryptobiosis. They pull in all their legs. They shrink to about half their normal size. They retract their head. Their metabolism drops to less than 0.01% of its normal rate, and they essentially turn themselves off. Not dead, not dormant in the way a bear hibernates, something more extreme than that. They become a tiny, desiccated barrel of near nothingness called a ton, and in that state, they can survive almost anything. The list of things that cannot kill a tardigrade is genuinely offensive. Let's just run through it because it needs to be heard out loud. Tardigrades have survived temperatures as high as 150 degrees Celsius and as low as minus 272 degrees Celsius. 1 degree above absolute zero, the coldest temperature that physically exists. They have survived pressures 6 times greater than the deepest ocean trench. They have survived doses of radiation hundreds of times higher than what would kill a human. They have survived complete dehydration for up to 30 years. And when water was reintroduced, they woke back up and got on with their lives. They have survived the vacuum of space. They have survived being shot out of a high-speed gas gun at nearly 1 kilometer per second, which scientists did apparently just to see what would happen. Some survived. The ones that didn't were traveling too fast even for a tardigrade. There is apparently a speed at which even a water bear gives up, but that speed is almost 1 kilometer per second, so let's not be too critical. We actually sent them to space, and they came back alive. In 2007, the European Space Agency attached tardigrades to the outside of a spacecraft and sent them into low Earth orbit for 10 days. They were exposed to the full vacuum of space, to solar UV radiation, and to cosmic radiation. All 3 of the things that should make survival completely impossible. When they came back, a significant portion of them were not only alive, but had successfully reproduced in space. They had laid eggs in outer space with no air while being blasted with radiation. The eggs hatched, the babies were fine. Scientists who had spent their careers studying extremophiles, organisms that live in extreme conditions, described the results as shocking. This wasn't a creature that barely scraped through. This was a creature that went to space, started a family, and came home like it was a mildly inconvenient commute. There are tardigrades on the moon right now, possibly alive. In 2019, an Israeli lunar lander called Beresheet crashed on the surface of the moon. It was carrying, among other things, a payload of dehydrated tardigrades in their ton state. The crash was hard, the lander was destroyed, but the tardigrades, sealed in their protective container, dehydrated, essentially switched off, may well have survived the impact. They are almost certainly still up there. Whether they are still viable, whether you could rehydrate them and bring them back to life, nobody knows for certain. What we do know is that their survival is considered genuinely plausible by scientists. There are potentially living animals on the moon right now. They got there by crashing, and they might be fine. What tardigrades actually mean for the bigger picture? Here is why this matters beyond being an impressive party fact. One of the biggest questions in science is whether life could travel between planets, carried on asteroids, on debris from planetary collisions, on spacecraft. The idea is called panspermia, and for a long time the argument against it was simple. Nothing could survive the journey. The radiation, the vacuum, the temperature extremes, the impact at the destination. It all seemed impossible. The tardigrade does not make panspermia proven, but it does make it significantly less impossible. If a microscopic animal can survive space exposure, survive impacts, survive radiation, and survive for decades in a dormant state, then the idea of life hitching a ride across the cosmos on a rock becomes a lot harder to dismiss. The tardigrade is 0.5 millimeter long and lives in your garden, and it might be the closest thing we have to proof that life is tougher, more resilient, and more widespread than we ever dared to assume. So next time you feel like the world is a lot, and everything is a bit much, just remember the tardigrade. Boiled, frozen, irradiated, shot out of a cannon, crashed into the moon. Still going. Still fine. Still laying eggs. 0.5 millimeter of pure, unstoppable, microscopic stubbornness. And honestly, kind of an inspiration. If this blew your mind even a little, share it. Someone in your life needs to know about the water bear. And subscribe, because the natural world has a lot more of this waiting for you.